This is William K. Murtaugh, Merc Witness 1, and this is Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020. And I believe it is officially 120 days or 4 months, almost gave him credit for time served. 4 months that Field McConnell has spent in jail. Now, things got a little strange yesterday. There was a bond hearing for Field McConnell in an effort to get the bond reduced. But there's no record of it. Now, this is unusual for the state of Florida to do this. I mean, it was scheduled for the 2nd of March. It was actually held on the 2nd of March. But for some reason, it is yet to be published as of 1 o'clock this afternoon when I started this video. Now, I did learn details which I really can't go into other than the hearing was held and arguments were made, but that's as far as it went. The Friday hearing, which is going to be relatively short from what I understand, is primarily for the judge to render his decision on whether or not the bond is going to be reduced. Now, this is unusual. Usually in these bond reduction hearings, they last about 15 minutes to a half hour. The defense argues for a reduction in bond. The state argues either, yeah, we agree under certain conditions, or no, we feel that it needs to stay the same, and the judge makes a decision on the spot, and that's the end of the matter. This time, however, it worked a little different. Things went differently in court, and as a result, we have this situation where now there's not going to be a decision on the bond until Friday. And the rescheduling wasn't even listed in the Broward County Clerk of the Court docket record. There's absolutely no record that there's going to be a bond hearing again on the 6th of March. And there's only a limited amount of criteria where this is allowed under state law, because under our sunshine laws, you have to disclose any meeting, and a bond hearing is considered a meeting that's conducted in the state of Florida as part of official business, and anything like this is considered official business, and so it should have been published. But it wasn't. And like I said, there's exceptions to the rules, and all you can do at this point is speculate. And I'll say this under the cloak of speculation, since I'm not stating it as fact, is that there are certain people that might have cause to worry because someone might be getting ready to turn state's evidence. See, one of the things that sometimes happens in these hearings is that it may start out as a bond reduction hearing, but in order to facilitate the argument in favor of granting a reduction in bond, is one or more of the attorneys may argue that Field McConnell, or quote-unquote anybody that is up for a bond reduction or release on your own recognizances, is that they may be turning state's evidence. Or, in this case, being a federal witness against other likely defendants. Now, let's look at this hypothetical. Again, this is an opinion. It's not fact. It's not actual events. But let's look at this hypothetical. Why did Field McConnell get in this situation? He got into this situation by listening to Timothy Charles Homestead. See, Timothy Charles Homestead has had a beef, as it were, with the victim in this action for 10 years. And Timothy Charles Homestead was also handed a restraining order, an order for protection, virtually the same order as was given to Field McConnell. And Tim Homestead violated. He got 4 misdemeanor charges for doing so. Field McConnell one-upped Timothy Homestead and got hit with a felony cyberstalking charge. Got hit with 3 of them. The state moved forward with one of the charges. It's holding the other 2 in what is called abeyance for future action, which may have come up. So, what if the state of Minnesota is now considering upping the charges against Timothy Charles Homestead to that of a felony? And the reason that the state of Minnesota would up it to a felony, as well as the state of Florida, is because of testimony that may be provided by Field McConnell. Under this hypothetical, Field McConnell, through his defense attorney, might try to argue that it was Tim Homestead that incited him to make these statements, that it was Timothy Charles Homestead and perhaps 1 or 2 others that argued for Field McConnell to make these statements. That's incitement to commit cyberstalking under federal law. Well, under state law at this point, but it could be federal law at some point, but let's just stick to the state statutes. You know, we could be looking at a charge of conspiracy to commit felony cyberstalking under Florida statutes. Because Tim Homestead would have taken advantage of the mental state of a 70-year-old man and persuaded him to make these statements on public medium. And that perhaps there's evidence that Timothy Charles Homestead, pretending to be a quote mystery caller or someone else, may have committed a felony violation on Field McConnell's show. And if Field McConnell makes that statement to the Florida court, there could be an arrest warrant issued for Timothy Charles Homestead. Now, wouldn't that be something? You know, but again, I don't have that information on me. That's pure speculation. So, you know, just bear in mind, this is all hypothetical speculation. What would be a likely reason for this weirdness when it comes to why an open, routine bond hearing suddenly turned into a sealed case where it's not even listed on the docket, either the date the actual hearing occurred or the fact that they're going to have another one on Friday. This is very unusual, very rare, and the scenario I laid out could be a possibility. That there's something more important going on than a bond hearing for someone that's accused of a felony crime in the state of Florida. So it's going to be interesting to see how all this turns out. Because there's a lot of things going on. Remember, we have not only this case against Field McConnell, but we've got kidnapping charges over the heads of people. Now, if it turns out there was an FBI agent in that hearing, that would not be normal in a case like this. There would no need for the FBI to be at a bond reduction hearing for Field McConnell if all that we were doing is trying to get the bond reduced for Mr. McConnell. There would be no reason for an FBI agent to be sitting in on the case unless that FBI agent was there as part of a federal investigation. That there's something going on at the federal level that may have been the cause of this FBI agent to be in the court. And maybe that FBI agent had something to say to the defense attorney. Again, this is speculation. I'm not saying there was an FBI agent there, but we don't know, since this is a closed hearing, that there was not an FBI agent there. So you're going to have to take this into consideration, that I am not stating this as a fact. I am stating this as speculation, as an opinion, that there may have been an FBI agent at that hearing, and there may have been the beginning of some kind of negotiation between the federal authorities and Field McConnell. And a logical assumption would be that if this scenario were true, that we are looking at a plea deal in return for becoming state's evidence against other people that are under investigation. Because there's a lot of things that have been going on. We've got this Pentagon Pedophile Task Force, which is people going around declaring themselves as agents of the United States government, that they are associated with the United States government on an official capacity. If this is not true, this is a violation of federal law. You know, it can land somebody in prison for 10 years if the federal government decides to do something about it. And it's like everybody says on Tim's side and on Timmy's side, Randy's side, Sarah's side, and so forth, is that the federal government doesn't go around broadcasting that they're under investigation, and there's all these sealed indictments running around. And so the logical assumption would be that an FBI agent might be sitting in on this trial because of the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force. So it's something to think about. But again, I am not stating there was an FBI agent in that hearing. I'm not stating that anything that I have said is true. I'm speculating. It's my opinion. So nobody can come and say, okay, you disclosed information in a secret hearing, because I don't know. I was not given details and so forth. I'm just making a speculation. Now, on the subject of cyberstalking, a rather curious post was put up and then deleted within the space of 10 minutes. I mean, this thing was like one of these disappearing emails I used to get, where once I read the email, it goes away. There is someone on Facebook that hinted at me, Agent 19, and I think Margaritaville could be the subject of a stalking accusation. And I thought this rather funny, because as I just mentioned, guess what Field McConnell is being tried for? Felony cyberstalking. What did Tim Holmseth get charged with? 4 counts of misdemeanor cyberstalking. And what has Kirk Pendergrass of E-Clause been arguing? He's argued that there is no such thing as cyberstalking. That in order to be a crime takes place, it has to happen in the state where the alleged victim resides. Now, I don't live in Minnesota. I don't live in Wisconsin. I don't live in Iowa or all these other states where this alleged cyberstalking would have to have taken place. I live in the state of Florida. And in order for someone to be a victim of cyberstalking under Kirk's law, the victim and I have to reside in the same state. And there has to be grand jury indictments and all this stuff. Grand jury has to get involved. So Kirk Pendergrass is basically stated that there is no such thing as cyberstalking. And remember what else Kirk Pendergrass said? Kirk Pendergrass said that the internet is entertainment. He even enunciated the word. He said the internet was created for entertainment. So that means that Kirk Pendergrass is arguing against cyberstalking. He's arguing against Bill McConnell being charged with cyberstalking. So any claim by, say, Randy Erickson, Tim Holmes, Seth, any of these other people is moot because my YouTube channel is entertainment. There is no stalking. You know, I find it kind of funny that accusation would be made. Probably the reason the post was immediately removed is because Randy Erickson has pictures of me on her Facebook page. Now, why is that? Why would Randy Q. Erickson have pictures of me on her Facebook page? Isn't that stalking? I guess it depends on who you ask. I did not give Randy Erickson permission to use that picture. That picture was extracted from one of my websites. Randy Erickson would have to have gone on my website to get that picture. It wasn't a newspaper publication. It wasn't a clip off a TV. It was a picture of me next to a Orange County police car holding a briefcase. Now, I've discussed this before, but Randy Erickson had that picture still there on her Facebook page. You know, what's the reason for her having that picture on that page? You know, and there's more than one reference to me on her Facebook. There's all kinds of references to me on her Facebook. At least there were. Maybe all of a sudden this stuff is starting to disappear. But in the same post that I no longer can find, there was a reference to files and so on and so forth. And Kirk Pendergrass getting involved in investigating cyberstalking. And the only problem with getting involved in cyberstalking in any investigation is that Kirk Pendergrass's words would be used against him in court. See, Kirk Pendergrass has gone to great pains to argue that the charges against Bill McConnell are not legitimate because he's not a resident of the state of Florida. His alleged crime that led to these charges happened in the state of Wisconsin. Florida has no jurisdiction. And so anyone filing charges against anyone for cyberstalking, according to Kirk's law, would have no case. because in virtually all cases, that person would have been a resident of another state at the time the incident occurred. As for why Tim Holmseth wasn't guilty of cyberstalking, according to Kirk's law, this had to do with a freedom of the press issue. That Tim Holmseth was acting in his capacity as a reporter. Well, so is every single solitary person out there. All the people that put up clips and so forth of already established public information are reporting on incidents. They are what we would refer to as citizen journalists. Social media journalists, and their content would be protected by the same First Amendment argument that both Timothy Charles Holmseth and Phil McConnell are making. So Kirk Pendergrass would lose simply because of the points that he's made for the past at least year when all this dispute has been going on. That there are First Amendment issues at work here. That everybody has the right to express their opinions and so on and so forth. Even if that opinion is showing somebody with their head cut off and telling people that they should be killed and sent to Gitmo and so on and so forth. So it would be rather funny and interesting to see somebody pursue a complaint of cyberstalking using Kirk's law. Because anyone that would be charged with cyberstalking could easily turn over all the statements that Kirk Pendergrass has made on the subject in order the charge is dismissed. And could even turn around and sue the person making the cyberstalking charge for making false statements to law enforcement. So what happens here is that if somebody were to do that, they would be betraying Kirk Pendergrass. And in addition, Kirk Pendergrass would be betraying himself. Because this is what Kirk Pendergrass argues. Go back and listen to all the arguments that Kirk Pendergrass has made in regards to Phil McConnell, including one that was made just last night. So he's contradicting himself. There cannot be cyberstalking or stalking because you have to be in the state, in the same area as the victim. You can't do it by remote control. So Kirk Pendergrass has kicked himself in the ass with that one. Now I'm going to move on here to something that I was originally calling on this segment, taxing matters. In another brilliant move, Timothy Charles Holmseth is bringing up the fact that he suspects that Eager Beaver up in Canada might be doing some hanky-panky when it comes to income tax. That he might be taking income tax that Phil McConnell has sent his way because Phil McConnell doesn't believe in paying taxes, and that Eager Beaver has done something shady with the money, as shown by the clip above. Now here's the thing. In the midst of this report by Timothy Holmseth, he points out that Phil McConnell has a $121,000 tax lien from the Internal Revenue Service. And this is something that supporters of Field McConnell have had a dispute about. But there is, in fact, $120,000 tax lien against Field McConnell. And it's not a stationary amount. The amount goes up every day because there is an interest penalty that is added to the base amount on a daily basis. And the fines go up. And eventually there's going to be a tipping point where Field McConnell is going to find himself in federal custody for criminal tax evasion. Especially since Tim Holmsus was nice enough to hand the federal government evidence of that. Because if Field McConnell has sent funds to another country in order to take advantage of a so-called loophole when it comes to federal income tax, he's violating the law. There is no loophole that would allow you to send money to Canada. Maybe to the Cayman Islands or some other offshore, but not Canada. I can't think of a single thing where Field McConnell would be able to send an individual tax return to Canada to divert the funds somehow. Can't be done. Not in his situation. He would have to be do a lot of stuff depending on what the loophole is that he wants to employ. And if there's no such loophole, then Mr. McConnell is in a lot of trouble. So Tim Holmseth may have caused the ship in dry dock to hit a iceberg. There's a lot of icebergs in Canada, by the way. Way up north. So Mr. McConnell may have gotten himself in just a little bit more trouble because of Tim Holmseth, because this information has been forwarded to the Internal Revenue Service. And since Tim Holmseth was kind enough to provide all the detailed information about who the case officer is handling Bill McConnell's case and all the numbers of the case and so forth, that information has been supplied to the IRS. And so, Tim Holmseth may have done Bill McConnell a tremendous favor by reporting this situation to the Internal Revenue Service. Because now this is turning into a money laundering case. Or, as one might call it, RICO. Smooth move to me. So anybody involved in that little transaction, and by implication this would be Eager Beaver, the IRS may want to ask these people a few questions like, did Phil McConnell send you money under some circumstances in order to evade federal income taxes in the United States? So, it's going to be interesting to see how that one turns out, because Tim Holmseth says he's investigating this on behalf of the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force. And by law, if you discover evidence of somebody committing a felony, you have to report it. You can't hide that information. You have to report it. Especially if you're an agent of the federal government. And as a press spokesman for the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force, if the damn thing even exists, which I contend it does not, you have to report that as your official duty. You cannot hide a criminal act. And as a matter of fact, you have to report to the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force, if it is a legitimate federal agency, that someone has come to you declaring that there is a major violation of both the United States and international law when it comes to all this child trafficking. That has to be reported. No, Timothy Holmseth does not have to have the material on hand. The statement made by Margaritaville on his YouTube channel is sufficient evidence for Tim Homestead to turn the matter over to the federal government. And not only does he have to turn this over to the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force, it has to be turned over to the FBI, because that is the law enforcement agency in charge of such matters. And if Tim Homestead does not turn this information over to the FBI, he is committing a crime. Because not only does the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force have to be notified of Margaritaville's accusations, so does the Federal Bureau of Investigation, because they are the law enforcement agency charged with investigating matters such as those described in the challenge that Margaritaville made to Tim Homestead. And not only would the FBI get involved, but the Department of Justice would get involved. The Inspector General would get involved. There's all kinds of federal agencies that would get involved because of the stuff that Margaritaville is claiming. And foreign governments might get involved since some of the accusations are against those in foreign countries, both inside and outside Canada. So if everybody is serious in all this, be it Margaritaville or Tim Homestead or anybody else, if they contend that they have files and so forth on all these criminal acts, they're required by law to report this stuff. And this goes for people like Randy Erickson or anyone else. If you are aware and have evidence of criminal violation of any kind, you are bound by law to report it. And this especially holds true of Randy Q. Erickson, who claims to be an officer of the court. It is alleged that she claims to either be or have been some kind of a property judge. She is an officer of the court, and if she has any concrete information of violations of the law, she is required to report it. Because if she doesn't, then she is guilty of malfeasance of duty and could be even in more serious trouble than if she had committed some of the violations that she has been accused of. So these people keep diving down a deep well by shooting off their mouths on the internet, because they're in areas that they have no idea what they're doing, and they're just stacking these criminal charges on top of each other. And this latest diatribe by Timothy Homestead and by Kirk Pendergrass has just made matters worse. You know, these people don't know enough to keep their collective mouths shut. And they're just going to keep getting themselves into more and more and more trouble. Because they're violating law after law after law. Because if Kirk Pendergrass is giving out legal advice, and people start going to him to seek out this advice, he's practicing law without a license, and he's going to get caught. He's already caught, but the number of cases against him are going to build up. That foundation of evidence is going to get quite large, and eventually he's going to get his ass arrested. And so is Mr. Hallett, since he owns the company that employs Mr. Pendergrass. Because if he has open knowledge of any violation of the law that Kirk Pendergrass is undertaking, then he is just as responsible for the violation of the law as Mr. Pendergrass. It's called aiding and abetting. So Mr. Hallett may have to answer for Kirk Pendergrass's actions. Because Kirk Pendergrass doesn't know the law as much as he claims. He knows nothing about the law. And one of these days, it's not going to be Agent 19 or any other social media personality that points this out. It's going to be an agent of the federal government. It's going to be a prosecutor. Could even be that grand jury that Kirk Pendergrass likes to talk about. And so forth. You know, he may get to see some of that in action one of these days. Because he's committing, allegedly, criminal actions that are going to get him in front of a grand jury. And get these indictments both sealed and not sealed. You know, he may get to practice Kurt's law. You know, and argue these weird points of law that he has in front of that kangaroo court that's inevitable that he's going to find himself in front of. So that's going to be a barrel of fun. And it's just going to be one more trial that I cover if this stuff comes to fruition. You know, this is why I've got mechanisms in place, because I'm going to have to travel all over the country to go to these trials when they start popping up. So I want to have the resources to go to these things. So it's up to you guys. If you want me to cover these things up close and personal, you know what you have to do. But in the meantime, we're just going to discuss things on a day-to-day basis. You know, so this little war between Margaritaville and Tim Holmseth is making it worse. I knows that support Bill McConnell, because now they're beginning to realize that when an offer of help comes forward to get Phil McConnell out of his mess, it's also pointing out the misdeeds of Timothy Holmseth, because Timothy has been given an ultimatum. Timothy Holmseth has been told to document the actions of the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force and the Children's Crusade. Now, Tim Holmseth brings up an interesting point. Bank records. Okay, where are the bank records? You are required by law. Bill McConnell is required by law. The Children's Crusade is required by law to account for those funds. Because no matter what the Children's Crusade is, be it a charity, be it an LLC, be it whatever, there are federal laws that require that any monies coming into and are expended by the Children's Crusade, and for that matter, the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force, has to be reported to the federal government, and it's public information. So, Timothy Holmseth has to make his bank account information public, because at one point, Timothy Charles Holmseth was affiliated with the Children's Crusade before he resigned. Resigning from the Children's Crusade does not exempt Tim Holmseth from reporting federally required records prior to when he resigned. So Tim Holmseth, by law, is required to disclose this information. And since it was Margaritaville that created the idea of a Children's Crusade, he has the right to know what has been happening with something that he had a part in creating. Now, it's not clear how much participation that Agent Margaritaville had in the creation of the Children's Crusade. But it is clear that he had something to do with its creation. And as a result, he has an interest in knowing what happened to it. Because it could be tracked back to him in any investigation, so he has the right to know what's going on with that organization. So what we have here is Margaritaville has what's known as a vested interest in knowing what became of the Children's Crusade and what has become of the funds that have been put into the Children's Crusade. Or it's a legacy of sorts, no matter what agreement was reached with Bill McConnell in regards to what happens with the Children's Crusade, even though he may no longer be directly involved in it. And so it's Tim Holmseth's obligation to disclose all this. And so Tim Holmseth, by spinning his little web of lies, is just getting himself deeper and deeper in trouble. And as the days, weeks, and months go by, we're going to explore every time he does something like this. Now, Tim Holmseth, Randy Erickson, and some of these others that keep coming up, including Phil McConnell, have to understand a certain term. It's called a public figure. Now, Randy Erickson has declared that she's somehow affiliated with the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force. She has declared that she is a very important part of what happens with Timothy Charles Holmseth. Timothy Charles Holmseth has declared himself the media spokesperson for the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force. He's declared that there's only one person between him and President Trump. Timothy Holmseth is also affiliated with Phil McConnell, who is more or less the leader, if not an important part of the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force and the Children's Crusade. Timothy Charles Holmseth at one point was on the board of directors, or whatever you want to call it, of the Children's Crusade. All these facts make these individuals public figures. And as a result, any probing, even on a daily basis, of the activities of these people is in the public interest. And this exempts public figures from a lot of protections when it comes to cyberstalking or stalking. Because what they do affects the public at large. Their actions affect a lot of people on a national and international basis. So any investigation, reporting, studying, what have you, is valid. And we also get into First Amendment issues, since I am a social media or citizen journalist. My actions and the actions of people like Agent 19, Margaritaville, even though he's a foreigner, and other people that are studying the actions of all these people, is protected by the First Amendment. And so, again, this argument about these people being stalked goes out the window, because all we are doing is reporting on the activities of these people and giving our insight as to how we feel about them. And according to Kirk Pendergrass, what everybody does on the internet is entertainment, which means all the defenses against cyberstalking go out the window because it's entertainment. There's no criminal intent. All we're doing is entertaining. So Kirk Pendergrass just shot down his own argument and made it so nobody else can do the same thing. You see, that's where we get back to this argument of be careful what you wish for. You just may get it. You wanted to argue that there is no such thing as cyberstalking, that all people are doing is being entertained on the internet, and all anybody is doing is exercising their First Amendment rights and so on and so forth, and people that are involved in these situations, the alleged victims, don't even live in the state where the reporter lives, so there can't be any crime, because the crime would have to have been committed in the county, city, state that they live in. And it's not happening, according to Kurt Pendergrass. And so we drudge on, day in and day out, pointing out the actions of these people and why we feel that the actions of these people are wrong. So until later, this is William K. Murtaugh, Mert Witness 1. Have a good one.